Yo, what's good, everybody? Today I'll be taking a look at Halo 4, man. Halo was my favorite game series at the time, but I lost interest in the series after Halo 4. However, in recent years, I've seen consistent praise online through YouTube comments, Reddit, internet forums, which is something I don't remember seeing at the time. That had me wondering, was it really that good? After all, it has been 8 years since the release, and it's had its time to ferment and marinate and shit. So I got curious, maybe there was something I missed, or maybe I was just resistant to change, right? So I decided to come back and take a critical look at the game. I want to come in with as an open mind as possible. I didn't want any bias to influence or color my thoughts. I didn't want to come in there with rose tinted goggles. I didn't want to be one of those old heads that's like, oh, the original series is better. No, I wanted to come in there and just honestly try to figure out why some people love this game. So after playing through the game, I decided to break down the game's major points into 3 categories: gameplay, story, and multiplayer. Now keep this in mind, I will be analyzing and critiquing this game as a Halo title, meaning that it will be held to the standard set by the Halo series, which is pretty damn high. Halo 4 had its flaws, no doubt about it, but it was not a bad game by any means. It was just not a good Halo game, and my point for this video is to try to explain why. So 343 was worried about living up to the expectations of Halo, right? The very high and lofty expectations that was set by Bungie. They knew fans had this expectation of what Halo was and wanted to deliver on what that was while trying to give their own rendition of what Halo, or what they thought Halo was.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
They decided to put their focus on the story, which is fine, but they fucked up the most important part of the game, which is the gameplay. When people say Halo 4 is repetitive, they don't necessarily mean the missions or the themes or the settings or the types, really. They actually mean the combat itself. What do I mean by that? Well, each engagement is the same thing. It's boring, and it tends to make it feel like every level just drags on and on because the combat is so dull, and that's really all you're doing in these levels is just shooting, clearing out a level, and just moving on to the next part. You really only have one way of fighting packs, and really enemy AI is just so one-dimensional. You look back at great AI, probably the best example of game AI is actually Combat Evolved, which was the original Xbox. Chris Butcher, I believe that's who made it, was behind that Halo CE and Halo 2 and Halo 3 AI for Bungie. And through his own words, what made the AI so intelligent was the information they were able to process and the decisions they were able to make with that information that they had. So the AI had 2 ways of processing information. They could see stuff and they could hear stuff. For example, you're in an environment and they don't see an enemy player. What are they gonna do? They assume there's no enemies around, so they're just gonna kind of have like a wandering animation. They don't necessarily know where you're at or where you're supposed to be. They don't have any omniscient vision or sense of where you're at. They can only see you and hear you. So if they don't see you or they don't hear you, they can't do anything against you, which gives you as a player opportunity to maybe use stealth or maybe sneak past them or get the leg up, right? Maybe take out an elite before the rest wake up and realize that you're around. But basically they had 2 sensory processes, which is seeing and hearing. So if they saw you or they heard you, they will react to you in certain ways. And one of the most important parts of AI is pathfinding, right? They need to know how to navigate the environment they're in, because they can't make decisions if they don't know how to move around in it, right? That's really what they're doing. They're going to be moving a lot. They're going to be repositioning. They're going to be reacting to your own movement and your own positioning, your own tactics, and they got to be able to process the information. So if they can't navigate the map or the environment that they're on, they'll kind of just stand there and just sit around. That's why you might see some like flat AI that just kind of just sit there and don't really do anything. They're just kind of getting shot. And one of the most important parts of that pathfinding when it comes to the environment is the actual environment itself. The environments of CE, they were entirely rigged to the ground. There wasn't any physics. Like every environment, like the boxes and the chairs and everything was stuck, like it couldn't move. It had no physics, right? It was a part of the environment, right? Which is very, very important because there are no unknowns in their pathfinding, and they know what they can do and how they can do it. When you up the complexity of certain engines and certain environments, that kind of throws a wrench into what AI is going to be capable of. And that's one of the main problems that you saw in the later games, right? There were more enemies on screen, but there was a whole lot more going on. There's a lot of physics. There were boxes moving all over the place. There were, there was just, the environments had too much physics and too much going on. And there's not enough memory or hardware in the consoles at the time, and not even now, to process all that, right? How can you code and anticipate a random box just flying through that comes through the path of an enemy AI, dude? That's one of the main constraints when it comes to developing realistic AI, is just having the ability to navigate the environment in a way that seems realistic, right? Because if it doesn't know how to move around the environment, it won't be able to react to what you're doing, and won't be able to address the player in a realistic way. I don't necessarily expect 343 to be able to replicate that behavior without exactly understanding, and just I don't really expect them to be able to do exactly what was done in Combat Evolved. But given that, the AI behavior in this game is still atrociously flat. It's like this AI behavior was never a high priority for them, and they never got around to making it better, which is a shame. So the most glaring issue with Halo 4 from a gameplay perspective is the enemy AI behavior. The best way to describe Halo's 4 combat is flat. It's lacking a sense of urgency and hecticness that you would get from previous titles. Enemy AI is fundamentally not aggressive enough. And that's the most important part there. Enemies in Halo 4 tend to stand around, right? They don't have a lot of movement. They don't really reposition, which is fine. In other previous titles like Halo 3 and Reach and Halo 2, they stood around a lot as well. But the one thing that separated those enemies and the enemies in Halo 4 was their aggressiveness. Yes, they might stand around, but they're also returning fire to you, which is making you have to move, not necessarily them, which I feel like is a very underrated way to get around the whole AI pathfinding issue that I talked about earlier. So if we talk about the Covenant, just on a base level, in almost every engagement with them, they kind of just stand around and let you shoot them. It gives off a pinata vibe where you just beat them up until they give you what you want. It's like mowing the grass. They're just standing there and just waiting for you to just cut them down, right? That's really how it feels, and that kind of ties back into what I was saying before, is that they're not shooting back, right? If they shot back and return fire, like I said, it forces you to navigate the environment, forces you to move around, forces you to reposition, forces you to rethink your engagements with them, because if you're going at them head up, especially on higher difficulties, you're going to get roasted. So now you're going to have to think about angling and cover and positioning, maybe different elevations. So if we go back, I'll say a good example of great AI, like I said before, is actually Combat Evolved. In Combat Evolved, each engagement was different due to the reactivity of the AI to your actions. For example, if your shields were low, the elites would rush you and flush you out of cover. They would bait your grenade and dodge the last minute. They would strafe and out-angle you like a real person. In comparison, they had most of this behavior cut out. Yes, they would strafe, but with very limited range of motion and predictable patterns. They would not rush you or be aggressive. It was almost like they were on a leash, and the minute you went out of their range, they would de-aggro. At most, they would stand around and had a limited set of behaviors they would do, which results in sameness. The lack of reactivity to your actions would result in very similar engagements, where you would just shoot them until they died with no actual threat to you. Yes, they would do a lot of damage to you if they hit you, but that's about it. They were not hard to fight or fun to fight, really, because it wasn't a whole lot of stuff you had to do to kill them. Really, all you had to do was shoot them until they die, which is incredibly boring. So I spoke a lot about aggressiveness So the reason why the gameplay worked in Halo Combat Evolved was that the gameplay was just so tight. You had a multitude of levels, many of which were open world, create your own scenario sandboxes that gave users a multitude of gameplay options. However, the gameplay was just as engaging whenever you moved to a level like Pillar of Autumn, where everything was close quarters and linear. The pace of the combat, which is very key, the sense of urgency, the hecticness of fights and engagements was really engaging gameplay, which just made it so fun to play. So now moving on to the Prometheans. I actually really liked the idea of the Prometheans. They were a new enemy, something we had never fought before, and I applaud 343 for trying something new. Now I understand how daunting of a task developing an entirely new combat ecosystem would be now that the Covenant and Flood were both supposedly defeated. The Covenant was the perfect enemy for Halo and had every enemy type you could imagine, and really just fit every combat mode you could think of. Now try replacing them and the Flood, which was another dynamic enemy, and you have an extremely daunting task on your hand. Couple that with 343's relative inexperience and unfamiliarity with the genre, and you really have no chance of coming up with anything close as satisfying as it was to fight those enemies. So I understand 343 for bringing back the Covenant as an enemy from a design perspective. If they implemented their own enemy to replace the Covenant, most likely each enemy would have just been a reskin of an already existing Covenant archetype. A good example of enemy progression is the new Gears titles. The Swarm is a natural progression to the Locust. They retain the same idea and feel, but with a new twist that makes them feel different and fresh. They have new mechanics and enemy types that give the combat a fresh take while feeling similar to the essence and soul of Gears. Part of that vision and understanding can be attributed to the team retaining some of their original developers and leadership of the series. They understood what made Gears because they made Gears, and that's so important. That can't really be said of 343, as most of their original developers moved on from the series. They even went as far to say that they hired people that hated Halo. You can't be passionate about something that you hate. That is just fundamentally not possible. For example, if you're in school and you're studying a major that you just fucking hate, you're not going to be invested in your work. You're not going to be engaged. You're not going to do well academically. So you're just going to be having a terrible time because you're just doing something you hate. Nobody wants that. And I feel like that kind of came out when they made this game. It felt robotic. It felt, okay, we just got to hit the points we need to make a game and ship it out. That's what it felt like. It had no soul. They didn't put any stank on it. You know, when you play a Bungie title, the Bungie titles had stank on it, but you could tell they loved what they did. You could tell they played that game all the time. That can't really be said for Halo 4. So, moving back on to the Prometheans. The Prometheans come in 3 types. The Watchers, the Dog Joints, that I don't really know the name for them, and the Knights. So the fundamental problem of the Prometheans is the actual mechanics of this enemy is just not fun to play against. So let me explain. I'll start with the Dog Joints. Now, to be honest, I don't really have a problem with them. They were a swarm enemy type, large numbers, fast movement, could crawl on walls and different surfaces, but they were really weak. One shot to the head with a precision weapon and they were done for. Yes, they could be annoying if you miss their head, but you shouldn't really be missing shots out here, right? Like, bro, we Halo players, bro, like, you don't miss shots. You feel me? Okay. So for me, they were a fair enemy with a fair counter. I didn't really have a problem with them. Now let's move on to the Watchers. Man, where do I start with these motherfuckers? Holy shit. Bro, the Watchers have got to be the most annoying enemy I think I've ever faced in a first-person shooter. Their only purpose is to be as annoying as possible. They are not a threat to you by any means. Their primary mechanic is to run away. Let me repeat that. Their primary mechanic is to run away. The minute you shoot one of the motherfuckers, they take off like a dog that been chained up their whole life, and they finally got off the fucking leash, and you're like, come on, boy. That motherfucker look at you and take the fuck off in the other direction. It's like, this motherfucker, bro. It's like that. It's like, man, you better get your ass back over here before I beat your fucking... I can't do that no more. You're gonna Peter car on your ass. But I'm just saying. The motherfucker running away. It's like, bro, that's not fun. Is it having an enemy just take off the minute that they fucking run? And the thing about them is that they find the most perfect cover. They'll like dive way deep undercover, meaning that, so for example, if you're playing on legendary, right, everybody knows the real difficulty of legendary is not the enemy damage or anything like that. It's really just ammo management, right? If you run out of ammo, you're fucked, right? So the key here is conserving your ammo, so you don't really want to be wasting shots. The problem with the Prometheans is that since they run away, you have to chase, or else you're just going to waste those shots and that ammo that you put into that guy because they have shields. So you're not really damaging them unless you could break their shields, right? So what that means is that you're going to have to expose yourself to other enemies in the area, which means that you could potentially die or whatever, right? You're going to put yourself in more danger by pursuing them. So it's like a lose-lose situation. You shoot them, you lose ammo. You try to chase, you die by the other enemy. So it's like, what do? Okay, fine. Let me go take out the knights. So you take out the knights, but guess what? Guess who the fuck is back? Guess who's like, oh, word? You thought I was done with your ass? Oh, no. Oh, he's back. He's back, y'all. And guess what he's doing now? He's reviving. He can revive these motherfuckers. What? Bro, when I saw that, I was bent. I was like, what? Why? You do not want to see motherfucking enemies that you just killed coming back for whatever reason. They literally came... Like, this dude literally can revive them. So not only does he run away, but he revives the most annoying enemy in the second most annoying enemy in the game. So it's like double annoying. It's like exponentially more annoying. It's crazy. So given that they can revive down knights means that they're priority number one in any engagement. Doesn't matter what's happening. The order that you take them out, you gotta take out those watchers first, bro, or else you're gonna be in trouble. Now you can cheese it. I've seen it, I've done it. You can cheese it. You could take out the knights and the watchers will come out and expose themselves, and if you're quick on your shots, you can kill the watcher before he revives the guy. That's not always possible. Not every situation is lends itself to being able to use that. For example, sometimes you might just be overwhelmed by enemies and you can't necessarily get to where you killed that knight and stuff, and it doesn't necessarily work all the time. It's not something you could use every time you engage them. It's something that you can use if you have to, but it's not a consistent strategy when it comes to engaging with them on higher difficulties, which is really what I'm basing my analysis on, is how it played on higher difficulties, which I feel like is the true experience of Halo, but that's just an opinion. But anyways, they're a very annoying enemy, right? Like, just from a gameplay point of view, if you're a game designer, or if you want to be a game designer and you're trying to understand what makes fun of mechanics, making enemies that run away is not fun. I'd rather see an enemy rush me. Like, if an enemy was tired of my shit and he rushed me and he like exploded, I feel like that's better. You want an enemy to get more aggressive instead of passive. Passiveness in enemies is not fun. You want them to be aggressive. You want them to be bringing it to the player, because it makes the player think. It makes the player react, which gets them thinking, which gets their brain stimulated, gets their heart pumping, their adrenaline pumping, gets everything going. That's what you want. That's what makes it fun. I don't think people understand that, but that's what kind of makes it fun, is when you're doing all of that. You get that fight response there. Your heart starts pumping. It's like, oh shit. Your butt starts clenching. Pause. There's a lot of stuff that starts happening there, and that's what you want out of the player. Those are the reactions that you want. You don't want the player to be like, oh god, fuck. Like, you don't want them being mad, bro. You don't want them to be fucking tight as shit at the game, and then they take that shit out on their wife or kids or whatever. Okay, that's some other shit. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, but anyways, now we're gonna talk about the motherfucking knights. Okay, so the knights have pretty much the same problem as the watchers. Their primary mechanic is to run away. Again, yes, I said it. They run away. You have two enemies that run away. Essentially, they're big ass bullet sponges that will teleport away, just delaying the inevitable. They're gonna die. They're going to die. They're just taking their sweet fucking time. It's like, bro, you're not gonna win this, man. Like, bro, I'm the main character. You're just an NPC. You're gonna die. Don't fight it. Just accept it. Just accept it, right? All right, just accept it. Just accept it. Anyways, now yes, I know they have that teleport slash, and they can teleport slash to you, which is like, oh well, you know, I know what you guys are saying. Oh well, you know, you said they're not aggressive enough, but they got that teleport slash. They'll come slash you. Yeah, okay. But I'll say this: it's pretty easy to evade because you can see that shit coming from a mile away because they telegraph it so much. I believe a better mechanic, just overall, would have been to have them, instead of them just teleporting away from you or to another location, I believe it would have been better for them to teleport, like I said, behind you or in your position, right? I'd rather have them go on the offense and be aggressive, which is going to force you to reposition an engagement, right? Now, it needs to be balanced. It can't just be, oh wow, this guy pushed up on me and I had to run away from him, else I would have gotten one shot meleeed, right? But then I stepped out and got fucking smoked by the other enemy. It has to be fair, right? It has to be balanced, right? That's very important. It can't just be AIDS, but it does have to be stimulating, engaging, and challenging, right? It can't just be a pushover. So the knights are a really annoying enemy, but they're pretty easy to kill. They're just fucking annoying. They just teleport and just take forever to kill, and they're the same thing every time you fight them, right? But they're just fucking annoying to fight. They're not really fun or engaging. They're not really, honestly, I don't feel like they're a very valuable addition to the Halo combat. They're just kind of just there because they needed something new to be there. Now it has potential. I like what they were trying to do, the whole teleporting and the phasing. I think that would have been kind of cool if they had just spent a little bit more time. So I understand. I kind of understand why they did it. It just wasn't good though. That's the thing about video games. Like you got to go further than just making sure it works. You got to make sure it works, but you also got to make sure it works well, which is what makes video games so hard to develop. You can get a build working, but getting that polish takes so much time. It could take years to get something polished like that, and sometimes that return on investment may not be worth it. Okay, so the actual level design in this game is kind of a complex dilemma. In my own personal opinion, I don't believe the actual map design is the problem, nor the actual mission design itself. One of the main complaints I hear a lot is that the maps in the campaign are too linear. The maps usually have you going from point A to point B with not much variation going on. It's a stark contrast from missions most people tend to cite as classic Halo gameplay, like the level Halo from Combat Evolved, which is about as classic as you can get. Most maps have you going straight down a path with very little horizontal movement and maybe an open area. The problem with these open areas is that there's very little reason to move around within them, and harder difficulties, which forces you to really just stay behind some piece of cover and take pot shots at the enemy. That goes for large maps as well. One of the things I noticed with the wide open maps is that they were large for the sake of being large, and no care was taken with their design. Really, for me, it seemed to me that they decided to have a very formulaic design when it came to the missions. They felt that they needed to have X and Y and put X and Y just to have it. However, they missed the fine details and abstraction of why X and Y worked, and it just came off as soulless and robotic. And like I said earlier, the main reason why those open maps worked and that sandbox that you got from Halo worked was because the AI was so good. If you take away the AI and the enemy aggression, you just have a big ass open map that you don't have any reason to move around in. You just pick yourself up a precision weapon and just abuse them. Now let's move on to the actual missions themselves. One of the coolest missions was getting to the Infinity and getting that Mantis. Like, bro, do you know how hype I was when I saw that we was getting a mech in Halo. Bro, everybody knows mechs are the coolest shit ever, bro. If you've ever played Mech Warrior or Mech Assault as a kid, and you ever watched fucking Gundam on fucking Toonami and shit, or fucking Adult Swim back in like the fucking 2000s and shit, bro, that shit was cold. So we finally get a mech, and you telling me I'm going ass deep, or whoa, ass deep, pause that, whoa, wait a minute, what? Whoa, balls deep. Wow, okay, you going balls deep with the fucking mech inside Infinity, putting your nuts, I keep saying that, putting your nuts on everybody's forehead, bro. It's like, bro, it's over with. Like, for real, like, bro, just tell me where to go. That's how it was. I got that mech, I was tearing everything in sight up. I'm telling you. Another mission that felt really good to play was arriving at that station to save the scientists. So the reason why that worked is that it had multiple approaches to combat. The combat was close quarters and hectic. Areas were fair and fun to engage in, which harkens back to the design principles of previous Halo titles. Now, other missions just felt kind of lame, even though the concept was really, really cool. For example, when you finally got to fly that Pelican, they really just ended up being really underwhelming, where you just kind of went point to point, did some things, and got back into the vehicle. The same goes for the Mammoth. It was essentially an underwhelming on-rails situation. The thing is, on the surface, they were literally the same exact thing you would do in previous Halo missions. Reach is a great example of that. The mission with the Hornet, what did you do? You flew from a point, got out, did some stuff, then flew to another point. The thing is, how you flew to that point and what you did to get to that point really made a huge difference. In the Hornet, you use the X, Y, and Z axis to maneuver by raising or lowering altitude to avoid shots, flying away to flank pursuers. Really what I'm getting at, and the main point as to why the missions were kind of boring, was that the combat was just boring. What I'm trying to say is that the missions itself is not the problem. It was kind of inconclusive to determine whether or not the design of the maps and missions were the problem, because the gameplay usually carries the experience even if the section or level is linear or underwhelming. Reach was very linear and similar to Halo 4 in a way, but Reach was one of my favorite campaigns. The main difference between the two is how the AI actually behaved in those environments, not necessarily the environments itself. I believe that many of the levels would have been fine if the AI was better. 343 made a drastic change from classic Halo art style and upset many fans. One of the main complaints of 343's Halos is the art design. They have received so much backlash for their design that they reverted back to classic design for Halo Infinite. That should tell you something. Now, for me personally, I'm keep it hot with y'all, I didn't really have much of an issue with the art style. Now I know what you guys are saying. Yo, bro, how can you be a professional Halo hater and not have a problem with the art design? Well, I'm be honest with you, it just never bothered me that much. Yes, the change was crazy drastic. They changed so much stuff to the point that it felt like they were just changing stuff just to be changing stuff. But the reason why I didn't have an issue with it was just because that I wasn't really invested in the previous Halo art style. The gameplay mattered way more to me than what Chief looked like, and I was really indifferent to it at that point. Plus, you're in first person all the time, doesn't really, but whatever. But also, granted, the real reason why I didn't give a shit is because I was already pretty pessimistic at that point, and the addition of the wonky art style did not faze me. I was just like, look, add it to the list. So now, from a more critical point of view, the art style of a game is so important, especially one as iconic as Halo. People get attached to a particular look of an IP. It becomes what an IP essentially is supposed to be in the minds of its fans. Making a drastic change like that to the look might as well have just been an entirely new game. Also, like I said earlier, from a design perspective, it seems like they made a bunch of unnecessary changes to it just for the sake of making changes. It appears as though they went so far overboard trying to distance themselves away from Bungie's Halo while trying to bridge that fine line between something familiar and something completely new, that they ended up completely dropping the ball here. This was something that was really important, something that bothers fans of the series more than anything else, from what I can tell. It really didn't need to change at all, in my opinion. Some people might disagree with me. They might say, hey man, you fucking retarded. And I agree. I agree with that. So it may seem like I was nitpicking, but this is the standard that the Halo series developed. You can't claim to be a continuation of the Halo lineage without understanding at the most fundamental level what made Halo great in the first place was its gameplay. And specifically, its enemy AI and multi-dimensional approach to combat. It's that simple.